Good morning, one and all, and welcome to the webinar, Why We Exercise and What Happens Afterward. My name is Geneva Langland, and I am the Communications Editor with Michigan Sea Grant. Michigan Sea Grant is one of the member organizations of the Hazardous Material Transport Outreach Network, or HazMaTON. Our network is a binational collaborative of specialists from the Great Lakes, Lake Champlain, Hudson River, and St. Lawrence River regions. We focus on reducing risks associated with multiple modes of oil and other hazardous material transportation. The collaborative is committed to the dissemination of accurate, neutral, and data-driven information through education, outreach, and relationship building in order to improve public safety, the region's economy, and environmental stewardship of our water resources. To that end, we are pleased to bring you the final installment of our 2022 summer webinar series. Today's webinar, called Why We Exercise and What Happens After, will help attendees better understand hazardous material spill preparedness and response exercises and networks. So far in our series, we have learned about the movement of crude oil and its refined products from multiple perspectives, and the role of tribal law and treaty rights in protecting natural resources. These webinars were recorded and have been posted to HazMaTON's webinar webpage, and I'll drop the link to that webpage in the chat in a moment. Before we get started today, I have a few logistics to share with you. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on that website, the HazMaTON webinar page, which again, I'll drop the link shortly. It will also be available on Minnesota Sea Grant's YouTube channel. We invite participants to submit questions, comments, and/or any technical challenges at any time via the question and answer box in your Zoom toolbar. We'll be collecting those for the question and answer session that will take place following the presentation. And it is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Brian Streichert, an emergency manager for the U.S. Coast Guard based in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Born and raised in the Eastern Upper Peninsula, Brian joined the U.S. Navy and served for 4 years alongside the U.S. Marine Corps as a Fleet Marine Corpsman. Wanting a change, he began courses and graduated from Lake Superior State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in history. He later enlisted in the Michigan National Guard and would deploy as a combat medic in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom to Baghdad in 2006 to 2007. Returning from Iraq, Brian would accept his commissioning into the Medical Service Corps and finish out his time in service with the U.S. Army. He's a father of 2 young men, one serving in the Air Force while the other is serving in the United States Navy. Brian has worked for the U.S. Coast Guard since 2008 as Sector Sault Ste. Marie's Education Services Officer. During that time, he completed his Master's of Arts degree in Military Studies from American Military University, and he was later hired as the sector's emergency manager. Some of Brian's responsibilities are to manage the incident management team, exercise the Northern Michigan Area Contingency Plan, prepare and host the Northern Michigan Area Committee, and continue to build and improve communications and relationships between responders from federal, state, local, and tribal agencies, as well as various non-government organizations. Finally, Brian works with those partners to build preparedness for response exercise program workshops, tabletop exercises, and full-scale exercises to test the U.S. Coast Guard response plans and continue to improve those plans. And that final aspect of Brian's job is what he will be speaking to us today, that being able to prepare for spill responses so that in case of emergency, all of these organizations can come together to respond accordingly. And now I'll hand it off to Brian.
Well, thank you very much, Geneva. I greatly appreciate the introduction. And yeah, so I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to listen to me, first of all. But again, I want to thank specifically Rachel Pryor for tossing my name in to cover not only exercise planning, but also the why behind we exercise, and then what we actually do with all this information once we finish. So the exercise will end, but that's where a lot of the work actually begins. So thank you again to Geneva. Thank you, Tad, and I believe Kelsey. I know she's not on, but again, I appreciate the assistance in getting things set up for us as we move along. So why do we exercise? nobody really explained that to me way back in the day. So I remember many times when I was in the service having to do drills and exercises, and I always found them to be tedious and taking up time. But then we would get into more specific aspects that would draw my attention. So by the end of the training, I generally was fairly pleased with the takeaways I'd learned. Training in the military is nonstop. As a corpsman, we were in the field with our Marines and learning everything we can about what they do, while turning around and attempting to teach them what we know as far as the medical aspect and the life-saving techniques. So two very different roles, but coming together for the same mission. And until you have to actually apply these things that you've learned in training, it can be fairly difficult to fully appreciate why we do what we do. So moving forward, training for releases by response communities is continuous as well. It's very similar. Working with our organizations and pulling information from several other entities pretty much helps us in being able to respond quickly and accurately and proficiently. Being able to bring specialists in and knowing where everyone fits and how they operate is extremely instrumental in any response. We don't drill and exercise in order to see how good we are at something. That's a misconception. Instead, we're looking for our gaps and areas that require attention. Something we stress to those that are participating with the Coast Guard in these exercises, we aren't here to evaluate you. We're not here to evaluate individuals and groups. We're evaluating our own plans and assessing our response plans in general. So we hope that people take that into consideration, that we don't evaluate people or organizations. That's important. Our stakeholders know that, as there tends to be some hesitancy by many of our participating agencies that we're looking for flaws in their response, and that's not the case. As Geneva said, my name is Brian STREICHERT. I'm the emergency manager for the United States Coast Guard here in Sector Sault Ste. Marie. This is my 5th year with them, 15 total. Some of the normal roles are to manage the IMT, which is the incident management team. I've been tasked with the instructor for Stop the Bleed for active shooter incidents on base. I also contribute to the closed point of distribution coordinator for the sector, and I participate with the No Spills Committee as well. The No Spills Committee, I think, is coming up 15th through 17th in February. In regard to exercise planning and designing, we recently held the Rogers City Equipment Expo back in July. Our next event will be the full-scale exercise in Rogers City. That'll be the summer of 2023. And I saw some of the names on the participation or the participants list, and I believe some of you were there or are part of the Northern Michigan Area Committee already. Exercise locations are decided by the NMAC, that Northern Michigan Area Committee that we were just talking about. It consists of several federal, state, local, tribal agencies, as well as oil spill removal organizations, the OSROs, industry, and academia. The NMAC is kind of our one touch point that we can glean information from regarding potentially past responses, what's coming up, what's new and emerging technologies is a huge focus right now, as well as gathering information such as lessons learned and best practices, of which I'll share some of those at the end of this pertaining to the Rogers City Expo that we had. The NMAC, or the Northern Michigan Area Committee, works really close with the EPA, and I have a great counterpart in Kim Churchill, who helps to build out the agendas and host these events too. So if anybody's ever worked with her, they know her dedication to the craft. And then our next NMAC meeting is actually February 14th. So we hold that in conjunction with the No Spills. So on the 14th, we'll have that in Traverse City. Quick overview here. We will dive into what exactly the PrEP cycle is, as well as how contingency planning came to be. We'll discuss what a typical exercise looks like and how it's put together so we are better prepared for real world scenarios. And then we'll kind of go into, a little bit of that history, preparation during peacetime, and what we mean by that is, you know, having things prepared and ready before something occurs, so that we do have the exercises, the training, the drills, the knowledge going forward should we have a real world incident. And then kind of some roles and responsibilities during a response, and then previously with these exercises also. So how this all started, back on March 24th of 1989, the oil tanker EXXON VALDEZ ran aground, creating at that time the largest oil spill in US history. Roughly 11 million gallons of oil was released from that tanker, and it found its way into Prince William Sound, Alaska. Since then, our largest one was obviously Deepwater Horizon. So some things that came out of that, it created broad scale regulations on the oil transportation industry, which obviously was needed at that time, right? Just some of the things they looked at were the double hulled vessels, doing training for HazWOPER and hazmat training, and then some specialized cleanup teams were looking at specific wildlife like flora and fauna. Some other results of that EXXON VALDEZ incident is OPA 90. That's the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. Most of you are familiar with that. This act is an amendment to the Clean Water Act of 1972. What it gave us was increased our ability to have some federal teeth to not only push to implement safety standards in order to prevent this type of loss again, but to be able to punish those responsible for mass oil spills. Requests not only, you know, we don't only look at vessel response plans, but we also have facility response plans as well. And EPA will do the inland side of that, and Coast Guard does the coastal aspect of it. And work pretty close hand in hand kind of to work to enforce these codes. For those not super familiar with the myriad of acronyms that we use, WCD, that's just worst case discharge. CFR is Code of Federal Regulations. And I don't use these a ton in the presentation, but those are pretty good ones. You'll see those quite a bit, especially in this field. And then the GUI, that's the Government Initiated Unannounced Exercise. We hold these on coastal regulated facilities, and one example of that is the storage facility that is in Rogers City, Michigan, with U.S. Venture, U.S. Oil, and again, that's where we just held our third part of our prep cycle back in July. So speaking of that prep cycle, so PREP stands for the National Preparedness for Response Exercise Program. These are some federal agencies that you can see on here that that helped create this and then utilize it. So of course we have Coast Guard, we have the US EPA, we have the Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, and the Department of the Interior Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. So if you look to the right of that, you'll see, you know, what our prep cycle looks like. We have a plan. We organize, we equip, we train, we exercise and execute that after our training, and then we evaluate in order to improve our plan. And if you notice, there is no break in that. That's a perpetual cycle. So that's the reality of what we do. And just because we finish up in an area doesn't mean we're done with that area. So the purpose, it gives exercise requirements for oil pollution. It also provides us with a uniform methodology for evaluating. You'll see HSEEP a lot. That's the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program. Most of us in the field tend to use this as our rough guide, as it's laid out very neatly, and it really is a fabulous way to organize the process. You can imagine how many moving parts actually stem from organizing even workshops and tabletop exercises. That's why it's paramount to work closely with your port partners, like people in the emergency management field from the local counties. They tend to gain maximum participation, and they can influence local responders to attend. So that's one group of people that we tend to lean on very heavily, is the local county emergency managers. It also this program also helps in developing the exercise requirements. So big parts of it for us are building and maintaining these relationships that we built. I would say personally, one of the reasons the Coast Guard hired us as civilians in the emergency management field is that we are the continuity with local communities, whereas Coast Guard members, the blue suiters, they come in and they may be there for 2 or 3 years and then they rotate out. And to a county emergency manager, that can get pretty taxing. So again, I don't know what stake I have in that. I feel that one of the reasons that they hired civilians to do the job of emergency manager is to continue on with that continuity. You'll notice, again, that's a continuous cycle. We design, we conduct, and we evaluate, and then we improve and we start again. It never ends because we have exercised again in one area. It doesn't mean we're never going to come back to that area. We revisit the plans and continue to improve them, even though we may have finalized it and finished up a full-scale exercise in that area. We're always going to go back and revisit it. Okay, we'll get into some of the exercises now. This picture you see is variety of pictures, actually, is from a couple of different events, and they ranged from workshops all the way up to full-scale exercises. And I'll discuss what each one of those are. There's 4 that we mainly hold throughout a 4-year cycle. That top left picture, that's from our Rogers City event. You can notice there's a green dye that was placed by EGLE, and that was meant to represent, even though it does not have oil properties, of course, just kind of give us an idea and a visual of what happens inside what they call the frog pond should that tank ever be punctured and both hulls are damaged enough to release that product. So this helps NOAA in their trajectory model building. This helps responders. This helps the local emergency response teams in the community, the county, and even on site to understand how quick they need to, get the boom up at the end of that frog pond. That top right is an example of a full-scale exercise. That one was held in Manistee. And then bottom left, that's kind of a tabletop. That's the one that we'll talk about too, in this, and how we build those up, and then what we take away from these. So these are the 4-year cycles that you'll see. We recently did a risk analysis with our Northern Michigan Area Committee regarding our area of responsibility. Our area covers from Traverse City over to Alpena and then up to Manistee and Marquette. So we have a large area of responsibility, but we use our Northern Michigan Area Committee to come up with these types of things. So our next location is actually going to be along the US 2 corridor between St. Agnes and Manistee. But again, we're now into that full scale mode in Rogers City. So this is our 4th year, actually our 5th due to COVID, down in Rogers City. And again, we use the Northern Michigan Area contingency plan as well as the committee to assess worst case scenarios. And then we'll look at previous releases throughout our AOR and determine sensitive areas and areas of high probability as well. So there's a lot that goes into these, but this helps us determining our location for future exercises. The 4-year cycle looks something like this that you see on the slide. We're going to look at this cycle more in depth, with the first being that of the workshop. So workshops, they look at a couple of different ways. We do notification drills. We also do what's called ICS 201 workshops. Notification drills are extremely important in the response community. Keeping updated rosters of points of contact, they really help us in getting prompt notification to the appropriate agencies, both within the federal system and outside the federal system. The Coast Guard, we do what's called PREP notification drills, and we do those quarterly. We select an area of the Northern Michigan Area Contingency Plan and work through the points of contact within it to validate that those people are still there, that the numbers are still up to date. And then if they are not, of course, we go through and we update that. Again, these are both internal, and what we mean by internal is Coast Guard personnel or groups, or external port partners as well. Those are your external partners, meaning anyone or any entity outside of the Coast Guard. Those are your federal, state, local, tribal entities. We also keep in contact with academia, the OSROs, the industry, and maybe groups not specifically covered under those organizations. So ICS, or Incident Command System 201 workshop. It's a document that is much like a quick response card in the case of an event. Pertinent information such as location, time of release, maybe a map of the impacted area that can be added to it, what resources we have in the area. All this stuff is held, all that information is held in that ICS 201. Each geographic area that we exercise, we do this workshop. As we work through the 4-year cycle, this 201, that will continue to improve each year. With any updated information, new information, perhaps there was updated equipment by the time of the full-scale exercise. So hopefully we can get that all added up and everything finalized by the time we head out of that area. They'll have a completed 201 to reference should there be an issue. So again, this is the first 2 pages of an ICS 201. Some general things you'll find on it. Incident name. This is actually an important piece of response or drill or exercise. All things pertaining to this event will be assigned with that name and associated with that name. So this helps down the road in merging these things together. And obviously, if there's litigation or funding issues, they can fall back on that. This one was from the exercise in Manistee, Swift Current, it was called. And if you notice the FSE up there, that's that's the full scale exercise. So again, all documentation affiliated to this exercise would have that name on it. We have the current situation or the current status, and basically that's just telling us exactly what we know. There's no guesswork in that. This is strictly what we know. So you'll see that they'll include what the weather is, sea states. Obviously that helps in the response effort in the coastal zone. Maybe what other response efforts have taken place, who is already on scene, what's already been done. Then you'll start to see a timeline built up of how that was done and the times that it was done. The document is basically completed by the local and then briefed out as the, let's say the Coast Guard, the federal on-scene coordinator gets on scene. They'll brief these out. So the local responders brief these to the federal entities once they've stood up our unified command. These 201s are what we generate, again, through that 4-year cycle. So should something occur, it's taking this off the shelf or out of the plan to complete with new information. But it also has information that can be pre-populated, like those contacts or things to consider. What is available in that area? Should we consider road closures? Is there a hospital nearby? Do we need to relocate people or have them locked down? Do we have concerns with retirement homes? So there's a lot of things that you want to make easier for the responder and the federal on-scene coordinator to be able to answer. And again, having this information ahead of time is tremendously helpful. So this just is a continuation that's of that 201 of that timeline, but moving over to the other side, the priorities to this response are also listed in this ICS 201. And you'll see, people, environment, and assets. human life is always the priority, will always be in any response. So as well as response objectives, you see those underneath. Of course, objectives are what you base your movements on ultimately. The priorities align well with the objectives, and then we can start our response. Next, you'll see what's called the org chart or the organizational chart. You'll notice the sections are kind of broken up to determine the section leads. And we'll talk briefly about the organization of an incident command post. And then finally, the page at the end provides you with a list of response equipment. This is one of the areas you can leave filled out and update as things come into service or perhaps leave service. This document is used during training as well as real world events. Using this document and building it up again during each year of these exercises is what helps to help us to develop it all the way through the full scale. So making adjustments, placing things in the response book in the local community, or having it with the county emergency manager helps tremendously should something occur. So we talked about the workshop, and again, that all of these take approximately a year to build. The workshop takes a year, the tabletop takes a year, the expo or equipment drill takes a year, and the full scale takes a year to build out. But all three of those ones are building toward that full scale exercise. So we'll talk a little bit about the tabletop now. So the tabletop discussion. It's a discussion-based exercise, and you can see on the top left, it's very low stress. It's the first exercise in the 4-year cycle, and there's a rough format to TTXs or tabletop exercises, but I've been to quite a few of these, and though they have some similarities, they can be administered in several different ways. There isn't a set way we have to do these, but generally speaking, there is a flow to them. And the discussion is usually very solid, especially if you have a good moderator for it. This is where you get to actually walk through scenarios. A lot of the what if, then this type questions and answers can be worked through. You learn a ton from the others at your table as well as those in the room with you. So we found when we create our tabletop exercises that dispersing the organizations throughout the room to different tables has lent to some great discussions. That way all Coast Guard aren't sitting at one table, or all OSROs or all EPA or academia. You know, they're generally dispersed throughout it so that we can get a better grasp from each table. This particular tabletop was the one you saw in that earlier picture that was held in Manistee. The tabletop we held for the Rogers City cycle a few years ago was actually a hybrid. We had facilitators for each breakout room utilizing teams, and then we would all come back to one room on teams to brief out. So it was the first time I had done anything like that, but it was a great way to still maintain and move along with our prep cycle. We tend to give during these tabletop exercises, as they're working through things, we'll give some amplifying information and injects, just like you would see in a real world response, right? Maybe 2 fire trucks showed up, or there's protesters, or anything of that nature. So we'll toss these in to make people work through those. And each table will work through the information and scenario and then brief that out at the end. The great thing about tabletops is that you really get a feel of what others do and what they can bring to an incident. Once a tabletop is complete, we gain information through the after action report. And again, this is a stepping stone to the operations based and toward that full scale. Again, very low stress. And it's a great opportunity for our people to get to speak and share their knowledge. So after finishing the tabletop, we move forward and we go into an equipment deployment drill or an EXPO. Again, this is the 3rd year in our 4-year cycle. This is what we just did in Rogers City back on July 19th. The equipment was deployed. The OSRO for US Venture, US Oil is Marine Pollution Control, so MPC. they launched and tested some of their booming strategies as a particular point at a particular point in their response plan. So I'll discuss Rogers City more toward the end of this presentation, but this is a good representation of what an equipment drill is. This doesn't get you a good idea of how many people were there. That turned out to be probably the hottest day in July for us down in Rogers City. So people are hovered underneath those tents and on the outskirts there, but again, we'll talk about that later. So though it's used to test new equipment and procedures, it's also, as far as the equipment deployment drills and EXPO, it's also used to validate current practices. So this is what MPC did. They tested their plan and procedures to ensure they could indeed get boom into a particular area. They have likely tested this previously, but things change, right? Water levels raise and lower, so they needed to reevaluate their plan, and that's what they did while they were there. This type of drill gives you kind of a real world, real-time feedback also. We create an after action report for this event, and we look closely at the new and emerging technologies that could be utilized in the case of a release and want to hone those in. Really, this event, just like the tabletop and when we talk about the full scale, these are great networking opportunities for responders and members of the Northern Michigan Area Committee. We have to remember that every event starts local and every event ends local. And what I mean by that is when the first incident occurs, it will be local responders at the scene before the Coast Guard is on scene. It's kind of a perk of having a pre-constructed ICS 201 that we talked about. When the Coast Guard or other federal agency takes over the event, they'll be doing that 201 briefing to that on-scene coordinator, that federal on-scene coordinator. Quick story, we had a particular event in a small community some time ago, and they had not really gotten into ICS and what it all was, and you know, how they're able to utilize it and what it is. We bring in special groups from Coast Guard Strike Team or District 9 to help train up local communities and responders should anybody be interested prior to a full-scale exercise. So that local fire chief was asked, hey, who would be in charge of the incident at first? And he looked at us and pointed and said, well, you guys would be. When we informed him, though, that it could take us 4 to 8 hours to get to his location and that he indeed was in charge, Guy really knuckled down and paid very particular close attention to how ICS, and we were quite impressed by the time we left there. And finally, we'll talk about this full-scale exercise in that 4-year cycle. The full-scale exercise tends to be the largest. We see the stand-up of a complete incident command system, the IC incident command post, which requires many positions to be filled. You'll have federal, state, local, tribal entities involved in these. We have the responsible party, more groups from other agencies who specialize in particular areas like Fish and Wildlife, DNR, OSROs, academia, and various members from the local responders as well. You'll see the Road Commission, and honestly, the list goes on. Academia has become an enormous player over the last 4 years in our exercises, especially with the implementation of the Great Lakes Center of Excellence in our area. Locally, LSSU has some historic data regarding our area of responsibility that they can share. And with all the emerging technologies in our universities, they have been an extremely valuable asset to our Northern Michigan Area Committee. And yeah, to be able to hear and then finally see what they're working on as far as detection, response, and recovery items. What's neat about a full-scale exercise is they have what's called a sim cell. That's a simulation cell. And this is basically the call center for all players. So we aren't actually calling outside and, you know, working Michigan State Police up or anything like that. So all calls actually go within to this call center, and they actually help drive the objectives and injects to ensure that we're meeting our goals. It's a fun place to work if you ever get a chance. For example, if they call looking for Captain Phillips, whoever answers the phone becomes Captain Phillips. But again, this is objectives driven. The instant command post is what you generally see in it. That's what you're kind of looking at right there in a real incident. Well, actually, this is what you see behind the scenes. So they're the ones driving the response, the boats and personnel and UASs, UAVs, equipment and whatnot on the field. They're all working toward the goal set forth by the unified command. The outcomes of the full-scale exercise is that you now have validated plans, policies, and procedures. So you evaluate resource requirements for such an event and generate an after-action report with best practices and lessons learned. Here's a good look at an org chart. This is the basic overview of how ICS structure would look. Keep in mind that this is completely scalable. The federal on-scene coordinator for the Coast Guard in Sector Sault Ste. Marie, for example, is Captain Jones. Under him is everyone else, but that's impossible to manage on your own. So that's why they break it into sections. You'll see in almost all of these, a Coast Guard member would be sitting in a seat. You'll likely see a member from the responsible party at the bulk of these as well. They ultimately would be on the line for the overall cost and have a voice at the table within the unified command. As with the state, local EMs or fire, we've seen tribes seated with the UC as well, like the release down in the Straits during the cable release during ATC. But the unified command tends to be the smallest section. We have ops, operations, that's all moving and responding assets, planning, that maintains a common operating picture. Logs, you can see they have, or the logistics section, you can see they have a very busy task, a lot of finance, burn rates, maintaining running costs, compensations. But the great thing about ICS, again, is it's completely scalable. It can grow and shrink however best serves the response. I've seen them run with as few as 5 people in the command post, but also as many as you saw in that full-scale exercise slide. So clearly larger events require more people. So what happens after the exercise? It takes approximately 1 year, as I mentioned, to generate an exercise or a drill. There's several meetings that take place, as well as taskers given out to make sure that these things come together and flow well. The last thing you want to do is waste people's time. So as this full scale and larger scales start to come up, it becomes stressful and labor intensive. The exercise design team, which again consists of those federal, state, local, and tribal entities, as well as an OSRO. We have industry as a responsible party very often. And again, federal, that can mean EPA, Coast Guard, NOAA, those type of entities. But state is a wide variety of attendees as well. We always use someone from EGLE on our planning team. And then local can refer to the local county emergency managers, local fire, police, community responders, that kind of thing. So that said, just because you have a successful event does not mean you are finished. More work comes after you write the after action report. It's here where we see how the event went. We reflect on what worked, what didn't, things we learned about the response strategies and equipment. This is truly more stressful to me than putting the event on, because the information we share from here can help other planners across the Coast Guard in seeing what worked in our best practices and our lessons learned, as well as what did not work and why. It helps to give a guideline to what equipment is beneficial, who has what. Maybe somebody has some new emerging technology that can be brought in. And then finally, after that exercise, we see the RAIs, the remedial action items, and that's basically equates to funding. This is the justification of the equipment in our AAR, how things worked, how they're applied, what benefits do they have, but that's how we get our money. So remember, I was saying the AAR is more stressful to me than the exercise itself. Well, this is my desk. This is my normal desk, how it generally appears on a work day as I'm preparing for drills and exercises. I got my healthy water jug there on the side. Notepad photo is centered. Everything's looking nice and tidy. And this is my desk at the after action. So I get a little less healthy during this time frame. Looking at this, some of you guys are probably like, dude, that's not dirty at all. But I just want to point out a few things that eliminate some of the chaos. The monitors are off. That tiny little laptop off to the side, that bad boy is usually on with large amounts of data that I'm trying to split between the other two screens. The papers, the manuals, binders, packed with information, random folders with notes from the drill, notes from participants, notes from the hot wash, notes from the coaches and the evaluators, and maybe things not directly linked to the drill, but can be used as a reference. So that can of Monster, a few sticky notes, documents on top of the cabinet, and notice where the family photo got pushed off to the side too. So how can you help? Take ICS classes. You're able to slide in and assist in many different responses should we ever get to that point. And it's immensely helpful to know what you're looking at and what you're stepping into with just that basic knowledge of the function of an incident command system or the incident command post. Area committees are all over the nation and put on by sectors or areas. So Sector Sault Ste. Marie has the Northern Michigan Area Committee. These committees are where all of the federal, state, local, and tribal entities come together, hold presentations and discussions, decide where we should be exercising. We talk about lessons learned and learn about new and emerging technologies. We have a robust area committee within the Northern Michigan Area Committee. I think we're just over 180. We also have industry and OSROs on board, environmental groups, academia, and a host of other agencies that are active committee members. It's a great source to create relationships and keep everyone abreast of upcoming events, as well as informative presentations and any response lessons learned. So I want to cover now the Rogers City Equipment Expo that we had July 19th. Our responsible party is US Oil, US Venture. They've been extremely helpful in this. We also had backing from the Carmoose facility, which this sits on, and Moran Iron Works as well. So this was a large scale equipment deployment drill, kind of with a twist. We used it also as an informative platform, kind of with a science fair appeal, as we also use it as our summer's Northern Michigan Area Committee meeting that we co-host with EPA. Normally we hold the meetings in a conference room or virtually, but this was kind of cool because it gave us the opportunity for our NMAC members to be able to walk around and actually see the equipment that we've talked about in previous meetings, and more importantly, ask questions to those who operate in the field. This is just one of the drone footages that we had. Just a good video of the event. You can see its vendors along the edges, but what's tough to see is we have 20+ informative booths and vendors under the large tent as well. Our area committee members were able to walk around with these agencies and actually get to meet a lot of the people that are responders. It creates familiarity with each other so that should something occur, we can refer back to them, right? You'll see in this, you see Enbridge there with their large current buster. That's their orange inflatable device used to collect a product from an area with that tends to have a current, or they can tow that behind boats and collect any product in the middle of that. We see Northern A1. That's it's already circling around to the other boat. That's another boat right there of Enbridge's. Lake Superior State University, Marine Pollution Control. We have two tall towers from AT&T and Verizon. We had Sample Serve on hand, and we had Hope under the tent as well. And any of you who have ever been around and worked with Hope, if you're not familiar with this group, we've been using them for about 5 years at our events, both for pollution-based and security-based exercises. These teams are comfort dogs. They've been deployed all over to areas where they're needed. They're a great group of handlers, but the dogs are just some of the best stress relief we found. It amazed me during the Straits, I think that was 4 years ago now, we'd been on the response for about 3.5 weeks when Hope showed up with a couple of dogs. And you know, those in the command post were pretty quick to react and go down and sit on the floor and just pet dogs. It's very cool to see. And since then, again, we've included them in pretty much every single event that we've had. Another interesting thing was Sea Machines was present at this. And this was neat because they were another group that had an autonomous vessel, but they were running their autonomous vessel from Rogers City. They were running it in Boston. And I believe they're putting together a consortium to get more of our autonomous vessels together. So brief summary on the event. We had 40+ vendors, 8 unmanned aerial systems, static displays, on water assets, autonomous vessels, OSROs, academia, Michigan Tech, Lake State. We had 3 communications groups. We also had NOAA, EPA, Moran Iron Works. We have some lessons learned from the communications aspect. We also had, again, that Verizon and AT&T who brought their Wi-Fi boosters in. One of the other event items that was brought in that kind of caught the eye of our command was an item manufactured by Forts, and that was a towable mobile command post. That's something we're looking at fairly heavily, especially for the area we're moving to in 2 years. So some best practices, in order to host a successful event, it really starts at the roots. Putting together a productive planning team is essential. We normally build it with members from Coast Guard, EPA, Eagle, local emergency management, police, fire, and the hosting industry. This was a popular format amongst our attendees. We gave each presenter 5 to 10 minutes to kind of share with the group what their capabilities are, what they brought, and where they're located at the event. We had an air boss. This was paramount, as we had a local municipal airport a few miles from our launch site. The air boss ensured safety, not just at the site with the multiple drones in the sky. I think at one point we have 3 is how many he would fly at a time, but with that local airport. And we also had a Coast Guard helo fly in. And then some more best practices, the emergency technologies. We cannot say enough about how integrating things like UASs, new comms and relays, AT&T and Verizon, they really give our command post a great real-time common operating picture. This also leads us, though, to some takeaways from the event. You can see the lessons learned on the side. We'll continue to improve our GRS. Each time we hold an exercise or a drill, we take lessons learned that we need to capture to continue to build and improve these plans. Our air boss, in order to deconflict that airspace, him having a handheld radio would have been very beneficial. So we put in for what's called that remedial action item to hopefully get funding for him to be able to have that. We did have 3 different auxiliary and comms units with ham radio operators that would have been a great help. We just did not know how to use them. So one of the lessons learned is to have one of them on the actual planning team. So some of the challenges, technology, talking with technology, this was huge. All the technology, and yet how do we get it to talk to each other? Federal to state, local to federal, federal to civilian, civilian to state. How do we share the data that we found, and how can federal share with federal when we're allowed to only send certain size files? How does industry work with other industry to avoid sharing proprietary information, but yet get that information across? And then how can we include all that metadata, you know, for geographical purposes, such as wind direction, positioning of the UAS and that kind of thing? And finally, complacency. So this has not been an issue at any response or event that I have ever been to, but it's what we want to avoid, any form of complacency. Deepwater Horizon kind of was an example of that. And it's because there was the limited ability to train together with a variety of agencies. So they just weren't familiar with each other and what capabilities they possessed. Why We Train is the title of the presentation, and it really speaks to events like EXXON Valdez and Deepwater Horizon. We train heavily with our partners, our other agencies and industries, so that should we encounter even a small release of product, we know who is going to be coming to the scene, how we are going to respond, where we can set up, where we can lodge our responders, and what the unified command will loosely look like. This takes a ton of guesswork out as we exercise usually similar responses, and overall saving us time and making us more efficient. So to me, that's why we exercise. So I will end there, and I will take any questions I can answer for you at this time.
Thank you for a fantastic presentation, Brian. That sounds like an enormous amount of work being part of that cycle, but a really rewarding experience, especially if you get to hang out with therapy dogs. I think that
Right.
would kind of cap off the whole exercise experience for a dog lover like me. So I will remind folks, you can submit your questions through the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. We've got a question here. Do the priorities, actions, and objectives change based on a specific region? You had mentioned at the top that you consider things like where are nearby retirement facilities or hospitals or wetland preserves, things like that. Do those change? Those considerations change the way you exercise in different regions, or are they more almost flavor that you keep in mind as you're preparing a response?
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously people are always going to be the priority, right? So your priority is always going to be set upon that. Obviously, it's going to depend on what the release is as well. You know, some of it can cause a plume, some of it can't. So maybe we won't have to address it as heavily, but you know, looking at a response, that is always going to be a priority is people. If there are no people, then you move to the next priority, right? Now, when we say people, that doesn't mean just those in the area. That means our responders too. So we have to take that into consideration. Obviously, living in this area, weather is always potential. So we want to take a look at that and make sure our responders are going to be safe.
Great, thank you. So I'll remind folks, continue to use that Q&A box. We've got another question. Do the exercises involve installing or deploying pollutant detection sensors or sample collecting?
Another good question. Yeah, so Sample Serve is one of the groups that we brought to this one. I don't know if they actually did collection at that point. In our exercises, one of the things we're trying to do is get a historical baseline so that we know what's going on. We don't always utilize the dye, and understand that dye is biodegradable. It is not an oil of any sorts. So when we put that in, yeah, I don't think we tested prior to, but that's something that we're looking at doing. The course of that dye is what we're interested in, because as you look further down that channel and further down the coastline, there's protected species down that way. So we want to know, where is this dye going to go? Is it going to even leave the frog pond? And then NOAA can help build that trajectory model to get us to be able to view what's going on further down, so we know how to protect. Did I answer that question, or Matt?
Yeah, I suppose whoever submitted it can let us know if there's a clarifier, but
Okay.
Yeah, looks like you did indeed. So I chuckled a little bit when you mentioned the simulated call center for that final exercise stage, where if somebody picks up the phone and they are told to be Captain Phillips, they are now Captain Phillips. Is there sort of a room for improv and sort of leaning into the roles with an exercise like that, or is it too serious and people don't really have fun with it that way?
You know, there's always a seriousness to it, but they do have a good time with it. There was one incident that I was working in the sim cell, and somebody was calling just to report, hey, we have a flight going over right now. And when I answered, I just acted as if I were Dave Matthews. So all my responses were geared toward Dave Matthews lyrics. So you can have fun with it. It is a lot of improv, but you also have to know what the objectives are so that you're not, taking it away from there. Some of the people in the sim cell are hell bent on being serious, but you'll find a lot of people having a good time. And the reason they do that is the full scale exercise is stressful enough. We don't need to add stress to it. We do push in certain events more stress on certain branches in order to get them thinking forward, but then we can back off a little bit. You know what it reminds me of is middle school, when your middle school teacher was very strict in the beginning and then they could relax because you learned how to follow rules. It reminds me a lot of that.
That makes sense. You sort of have to establish tone up at the top, and then as people are really settling into the event, especially if they're getting tired and a little bit loopy, then the humor might slip in. So here's another question. Michigan is home to the No Spills Conference, the Northern Michigan Area Committee. It seems like there's a level of coordination and information sharing within Michigan agencies that may not be reflected in other states. Is that the case, and what can be done to increase coordination and cooperation in other Great Lakes states?
Yeah, so we really do have a very active, we have active committees. No Spills, I would recommend, the way that we got involved with No Spills was through our area committee. So if you have a robust area committee in your area, they bring in members from No Spills and people who attend No Spills. So really, this just comes down to marketing it and having productive area committee meetings that you can attend in order to get that information out there and then pull in that information. So we have a great working relationship with our No Spills committee. They let us go first for our area committee on the day prior to the No Spills. And I think personally, if more area committees did that, they'd have really high attendance, which means you're going to have great participation.
So that's a plug to everyone listening. Ramp up an area committee, join an area committee.
Yes.
Make sure they're active. We've got just a couple more minutes for questions. Here's another one. Is response to releases of toxic airborne pollutants something that falls within the scope of the response exercises?
So yes and no. Yes, like in that Manistee exercise we discussed, we actually had a mixture of chemicals. Once they hit the water, it created a vapor. So we utilize that information. That's why when earlier I was talking about, do we move people out of these, out of the homes? Do we just seal them up? This, remain in place type thing. So yeah, we do work those in. The last one we did though was that Manistee one, and I can't remember what the chemical was, but it did. We exercised that it did indeed create a plume.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A box right now, so I'm going to wrap up with a return to the dogs because, again, dog lover.
Sure.
What was your favorite dog in the therapy group? And do you know if how this group, the Hope group, responds in emergencies? Are they available to kind of deploy at the drop of a hat?
They are actually. So Ishkal was my favorite. Ishkal, they have Ishkal, Kayak. They have some great names, and it's not just here in Michigan. I believe they're reaching out further, but they've gone to places like school shootings, suicides, large scale events. They deployed down to the naval base during the active shooter. That kind of thing. So yeah, they're ready to go. These are amazing dogs. They're just something else, to be able to sit down and scratch a belly and, you don't think about anything at that point, but also being a dog lover, that's where the mind is. So yeah, I can tell you, if you go online and Google Hope Animal, you'll see their organization pop up, and I can't say enough about the group of handlers as well as the dogs. The handlers are great, but we want to pet the dogs, and they understand that.
Well, that's great. I'm very jealous. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Brian. That was a fantastic presentation, and we're looking forward to processing the recording and sharing it out to everyone who registered, and then getting it up onto the HazMaTON website and the Minnesota Sea Grant YouTube channel. Thanks to everyone who attended. Be sure to keep an eye out for more webinars coming out of the HazMaTON group, likely next summer. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.